Hello everybody, my name is Zool, and welcome to Modding the Elder Scrolls Skyrim. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at a brand new mod that has just hit the Nexus, and it's by one of my very favorite mod authors. T3nd0's Perkus Maximus is the name of today's mod, and it is by T3nd0, the creator of Skyrim Redone, a mod that I am absolutely obsessed with. And you've probably heard of it since it is one of the most downloaded mods of all time on the Nexus. Now what does this new mod do? Well, this is a brand new complete overhaul and rebalance of perks in the game. Now this mod differs a lot from Skyrim Redone as it mostly just focuses on the perks. It's not a standing stone mod, it's not an overhaul mod, it's not a difficulty mod, it just rebalances the perks and changes the way that combat's going to interact with these perks. And the reasoning behind this, I suppose, is that the mod author said he has gotten a lot of feedback from Skyrim Redone, and he wanted to put this into sort of a focused perk-based mod, which I really approve of. Now, you might be thinking, well, why do we need to rebalance the perks? And I think if you've ever played Skyrim before, you know that they suck. They're boring, most of them are just stat increases, and there's very few good, interesting perks. And what PerMa is actually intended to do is make every perk impact the way you play the game. Passives are going to have some form of interactivity, perks are going to have a huge variety, there's not really going to be point sinks that are going to basically, take up a bunch of your perks and really not do a lot, and all the useless perks are going to be removed. It is great. Now the way that these perks are divided as they are made into 3 categories, and this mod is actually modular, so if you don't want one of these categories, you don't have to install it. There is a warrior, thief, and mage category, as well as an optional file which includes the mod Winter Mist, which is a mod that adds a huge variety of enchantments to the game. It pairs really well with this. I mean, it comes with the mod, so that would make a lot of sense, especially with the way that enchanting is overhauled. Now, instead of spotlighting this mod in the typical way, I thought I would actually go over some of the design decisions and do a little bit of analysis and explain some of the perks to you. So consider this a Cliff's Note of the huge description. A proper spotlight will be forthcoming in a later video. Alright, so first up we're going to talk about the warrior module, and we're going to talk about some of the design changes by it before we get into looking at some specific perk trees. So let's get started with that. Some of the major changes in the warrior module are things that you will recognize if you've used Skyrim Redone. If you haven't, I'm going to give you a quick overview anyway. So one of the most pertinent changes is the way weapon and armor are changed. So weapons do a lot more damage and armor blocks a lot more of that damage. It creates a good parity where you really need to use the right weapon and the right armor, especially since weapons now have classes. Weapons are broken up into blade, blunt, or piercing weapons, and the different perks are going to affect different weapons in these classes. This is something that's actually configurable, and you will learn more about that by reading the documentation on the mods page. I'm not going to cover how to change that in this video, but just keep in mind that it is an option. Each of these different classes can phase different stats and other things like that, and it's really cool, but we'll talk more about that when we get into the in-depth analysis. Another really cool change are some of the armor effects, which you will again recognize from Skyrim Redone. Movement speed, attack speed, and casting cost are all affected by weapons. Heavier weapons, for example, will hurt movement speed a little bit more, and the different pieces of armor, so gloves versus a whole cuirass, will also change the speed. Finally, there's other things like timed blocking, improved smithing, which has better tempering and the ability to melt stuff down, critical damage that scales with skills, and even without perks, you can use bear traps, which I really like because it kind of is reminiscent of mines in Fallout 3. Finally, there is a mastery system for the warrior module, and basically how this works is that each warrior perk tree has exactly one mastery perk. These are mutually exclusive, you can only choose one, and they persist through respecs, but they bring a big change to each of these classes and really allow you to specialize into a specific tree. But let's get into a little bit more detail about some of these things. Alright, so here's a basic overview of the different weapon classes. As you can see, some weapons actually fall into multiple classes and thus are affected by 2 things, and there's also some new things, like the claws, for example, and the short spears. So it does retain kind of that cool weapon differentiation that you got in Skyrim Redone, but it categorizes weapons differently, so you don't just have to specialize into a single type of weapon. Now, each of these type of weapons also has their own unique effects, as you can see here. They have different levels of adding bleed effects, a different level of defense that they add to you, and they stagger enemies in a different way. So, for example, you could go ahead and use a Warhammer if you really want to stagger opponents. But perhaps you're interested in something that does a lot more bleeding damage. Well, perhaps you could do something like a Nodachi, but be prepared to not stagger enemies as much, so it might not be effective against somebody who you really want to keep stunned. Alright, I'm going to give you a brief overview, a little look at each of the talent trees, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I might look at 1, 2, or something like that of the perk trees near the end of the video in really great detail, but this is just going to basically be kind of an overview for you guys to see exactly how the perk trees are changed. The specifics of what these do can be found on the mod page. Like I said before, there's just going to be a brief overview. There is absolutely no way I could cover all of these changes in a single video, at least not without making it an hour long. So this is basically it with the warrior changes. Keep in mind there are those mastery talents as well as some other things. Now that we've looked at that though, let's move on to the next category. Okay, so next up is the Thief module. Once again, I'm going to cover some of the changes, some of the reasoning behind that, and then we're going to take a brief overview of all of the different perk trees, and at the end of the video, we're going to go into a little bit more depth. Now, the aim of the Thief module was to make the stealth, sneaking, and kind of thief playstyle have a bit of a smoother progression. In the vanilla game, it's very overpowered to sneak around, and it doesn't really have a smooth curve. Your damage ramps up really quickly and then stays there. This mod intends to fix that and sort of level out where you're going to get your mechanics so that you slowly progress instead of jumping up these big steps. One of the biggest changes has to be the way sneak attacks are now changed. So sneak attacks now scale with both weapon and skill level, so it depends the kind of weapon, speed, and type you're using when you're doing these sneak attacks. Spells can now sneak attack by default, but they still will make noise, so you're going to have to use silent spells if you want to do that. There's also a new sneak attack mechanic in relation to enemy type and armor. So if you're wearing heavier armor protecting vital parts, you will be more resistant to sneak attacks, whereas if you're not, you will be more vulnerable. Likewise, undead are very resistant to sneak attacks, something that I really approve of. Now, another thing is shouting. It now scales with your speechcraft skills, something that is existing in Skyrim redone and has been put back into this mod. And I think it's really cool because now you can sort of have a shout-based character, something that I have actually played in the past and really enjoyed. Additional information, golden lockpicks now have weight, so you cannot carry around infinite amounts of them. Potions work over time. This again is reminiscent of Skyrim redone. Another change similar to T3nd0's other mod is the way that the skill trees have been remanaged and a new skill tree has been added. So Wayfarer, or the lore perk, has been added, which allows you to gain lore and better understand the outside of Skyrim, find your surroundings, befriend creatures, that kind of thing. It has to do a lot with nature, and I'll show you that one in detail later. Lockpicking and pickpocket have also been combined to create dexterity, a skill tree based around reverse engineering items, getting them off of your enemies, and it also specializes in the new Katars, claws and knuckles that allow you to steal gear mid-combat. Now, instead of mastery, the thief skill tree has something that's called the prodigy skills, and like the mastery skills, you can only choose one, but instead of being at the end of the perk tree, these skills are actually at the beginning. The easiest way I can think of explaining it is that they are perk shortcuts. When you put a point into a prodigy skill, you unlock two kind of really high level perks that your character gets access to early. Remember that you can only pick one of these, and they kind of are reminiscent of your character's natural talent. Perhaps you are a pickpocket who grew up on the street, or you're somebody with a silver tongue. Prodigy represents the natural talent of your character, and I think it's a really cool system to have, and I think it'll add some really interesting perk choices early game. Alright, now in the background is a brief overview of each of the perk trees. I've labeled them and you can take a look. We'll go into a little bit more depth later. Red represents the prodigy shortcuts. As you can see, it does make quite a difference. In some cases, you are getting some very late game perks by being a prodigy at that certain thing. I mean, look at this one here. You get almost halfway up the perk tree at level 2, essentially, since you can put that perk in right after the immediate first perk. And some of these perks actually have interesting effects. Like I said before, the entire point of this mod is to make sure that there is a really good reason for each perk. There's not a lot of wasted perks. We'll go into a little bit more detail later, but like I said, I cannot cover all of these. I will just do as much as I can. Anyways, let's move on to the Mage. Alright, so we have the Mage module. Now, just like the last time, I am going to run through a bit of a justification, show you a brief overview of the perk trees before we move on to the depth. This video is getting a little bit long, so I hope you will bear with me and enjoy. Now, the aim of the Mage module was to make Skyrim spellcasting a bit more interesting. In the vanilla game, mostly what you're going to be doing if you're a spellcaster is spamming the same spells over and over again. And when you get new higher level spells, you'll just use those because they're just a better version of the lower level spells. Now, this mod does aim to fix that in a variety of ways with a pretty encompassing spell overhaul. So each spell now has its own little unique flavor, its own unique functionality. It may just be something small, but it will keep even the low-level spells a little bit useful and give them some sort of distinct function. This concept is going to transfer a lot more to the perks, and a lot of the passive boosts are still going to be there, but there's also going to be new functionalities that are going to help out certain types of magic overcome weaknesses that their spell tree may encompass. There's also going to be a ton of new spells and new spell types, nearly 200 in total, which is huge. There is a lot of spellcasting changes. There's no way I'm going to be able to cover them all, but there's a couple of things I'm going to mention. One is there's no longer a cost reduction with scaling. When you become a really ultimate powerful wizard, spells are not just going to be super cheap for you. The low-level spells are still going to be costing as much. Unless you put perks to reduce this in some other way, it's not going to scale with your level. And that's because the lower-level spells are still going to have a little bit of function. Also, the main tree, novice, apprentice, artisan, master, that tree is not going to just give you a cost reduction. It's actually going to give you a couple of effects, and it's going to grant you a random spell when chosen. So you might be able to get some pretty cool spells right off the bat that you wouldn't have got normally. Couple of other things to talk about: reworked mana costs on all the spells so that this balancing is a little bit more fair, and then of course the focus perks. Now the focus perks are a little bit closer to mastery, except there's 2 per tree. Now you can only pick 1 throughout all the trees, so it's not like you get to pick 1 per thing, you get to pick 1 through all of the trees, just like with the mastery and the prodigy perks. These ones come sort of near the end, and they give you some pretty cool effects, passive boosts, spells, and abilities, or combinations of the two. If you get a spell focus, you are going to get some very, very strong effects, but there might be some downsides associated with them as well, so you will have to be aware. Now, as usual, let's take a quick look at the perk trees in sort of a vague overview. These spell perk trees are really impressive. When you're a conjurer, you can focus on necromancy or perhaps summoning Daedra, as they're both in different tiers. Destruction mages can now add new effects to their spells and use spells that blur the line between fire and ice, as well as using one-off effects. Enchanters can reanimate their weapons, create staves and special scrolls to use elaborate, amazing spells, and it makes the game a lot more interesting. Illusion mages also have a lot of really cool things, focusing from controlling to manipulating and making people unaware. Restoration focuses on the manipulation of life, which allows it to do some damage and makes it less of just a healing spec. Alteration has focuses on kinesis, teleportation, and flesh to power types of skills that alter your very being. Overall, I think these are really awesome changes that have been added, but let's take a look at a couple of these perk trees in a little bit more detail before we wrap up the video. Alright, as promised, we're going to take an up-close look at a couple of the perk trees. Now, I can't show you all of this because it's just simply not feasible, but I will give you a quick taste of a couple of them. I really recommend you download the mod and check it out for yourself because it is awesome. So, first up is smithing. This is a warrior perk tree, so you need the warrior module to use it, and it kind of has a very interesting way of doing things. The smithing tree is broken up into a couple of branches, each of them with their own unique style. The one on the left is the light armor armor tree. It focuses on making light armor, and it has its own perks, starting with leather going all the way up to dragon. The reason dragon is given to light is for balancing reasons, since Daedric gear is given to the heavy armor users. Heavy armor, on the other hand, is the tree on the right, and it ranges from steel through dwarven all the way up to Daedric armor, which is a really interesting end material. But there's a couple of different things on the way that we also have to look at. The center of the tree has perks like Meltdown and trees that specialize in either weapons or armors. There's also jewelry perks that allow you to make basic jewelry or to create something called refined silver, which allows you to make weapons that are super amazing at destroying things like werewolves. There's also a perk called Copycat, which allows you to make lesser versions of legendary weapons. It's a very interesting perk that's available about halfway. There's also a really interesting perk section on the side splitting off of Dwarven, and that is the Automaton creation. This allows you to use Dwarven materials to create your own Dwarven Automaton army. There are several perks to go in here, but it allows for a really cool, unique playstyle. In combination with the bear trap kind of things, it allows you to make bear traps and customize them, it can allow you to play sort of a tinkerer mechanist. Perhaps you use a crossbow that you've upgraded yourself with your army of automatons and traps. One of the things I really like about this mod is it allows you to create completely new playstyles that were not possible in vanilla Skyrim. Alright, I did promise you a look at the Wayfarer perk tree, and I'm going to go over it, but I'm going to go over it quickly because we are running out of time. This video is running very, very long. Later on, I might do a bit more of an in-depth analysis of the perks, but as of right now, I'm just going to give you an overview. This perk tree has some pretty cool things. It has a little tree section that allows you to improve your gathering. One thing of note, I have taken the prodigy in dexterity, and you'll notice here that I can't take this one even though I have the skill requirements. That's because you can only take one per section. Again, the prodigy skills are the ones that allow you to take those little shortcuts. So most of the other perks here have to deal with survival, hiding, hunting. The lore perks allow you to do a little bit more damage to certain types of creatures. The Forerunner perk allows you to use animal companions. There's some perks to do with that. The tree ends off with lore on great monsters like dragons, as well as other huge creatures, humanoids, and there's another perk that does something about foreign armor. And this brings up one of my first criticisms of this mod, and that's the perks don't really describe what they do. They have some pretty cool flavor text, but that's about it. They don't specifically tell you what you do. So if you want to create a cool build, you're probably going to have to go ahead and dig up the documentation and read specifically what these perks do, since they don't tell you exactly. And I'm not sure if that's either just sort of a first step to the mod author and there'll be a little more detail later, or the fact that he's added so much into these perks that he can't effectively tell you what they do due to some sort of character limit. I'm not sure. Destruction is the mage tree I'm going to show you, and it is really, really interesting. It allows you to sort of use focused types of spells, elements, and gives them all really cool effects. So as I told you, the base center of studies just give you a couple of random spells. That's about it. But it's the side skills that are really, really interesting. And I apologize for my frame rate here. I'm not really sure what was going on. So some of the things that it adds are special effects. For example, the Sigil of Flame allows you to have flames that burn through the target's armor. Similarly, the Cradle of Fire, a spell after that, actually allows you to make people drop their weapons and their shields, because basically the shields and stuff get so hot that the enemy has to throw them on the ground. There's also shock spells, which allow you to do things like create chain lightning, or later on even give you special effects that increase your own personal damage. Lightning spells are still similar to the way they are in Skyrim, but they also have a couple of other things, including leaping around through armor, as I mentioned earlier. As you move up, you'll see different things like the ice spells, which allow you to shatter them into diamonds for doing extra damage, and even adding bleed effects to the enemy. It's super cool. There's kind of two tiers to them. There's the basic level of all of these things, and then when you go up, you get to a really high level of them, where you sort of master each of these spell schools. So if we look over here, for example, we'll see Conflagration. Conflagration basically allows you to blast a target with one last burn right after they're finished taking the damage over time, which allows you to sort of perform kind of a finishing move with your fire spells. It's a very interesting concept. You can also go ahead ahead and focus your studies specifically on flame, allowing you to become a pyromancer. So you can specialize in the spell schools, allowing you to get different levels out of your perks. Similarly, you could focus on, say, electricity, or you could just go ahead and take the electricity perk here, which allows you to give yourself a really amazing buff to your speed by channeling the electricity into yourself. If you don't want to channel that electricity into yourself, you could channel it to the enemy and basically sap all their mana, becoming a sort of anti-caster using this electrical spells. It's a really interesting playstyle, and again, with the detailed descriptions not being what they are, I could go dig up the description, but I encourage you to check it out yourself. Finally, let's talk focuses. The focuses are the capstone spells. You can only choose one throughout all the magic trees, and they each have their own playstyle with them. The one we're looking at here is the Elementalist. It allows you to weave different spells together and create really cool, fun combos. The Siege Mage, on the other hand, focuses on really supercharged, focused, singular spells, doing massive damage. You could really specialize yourself as a Pyro Siege Mage and create a build like nothing that's ever been seen before. Unfortunately, this video is going really long, so I'm going to have to call it here. I'm going to cover how to install this mod at a later date using Mod Organizer and all the latest tools, but I simply do not have the time. I could continue talking about this mod forever, but I'm going to leave it here. If people like this, if people are supporting this video, I am going to continue with my coverage of this mod because I think this is going to be a huge mod and I think it's really going to matter. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean a lot to me. I have been doing a lot of mod coverage. I cover a lot of different games, Skyrim, KOTOR, things like that. I also have some little funny playthroughs. You can go ahead and check those out on your own. Anyway, I don't want to make this video any longer than I have to, so thank you very much for watching. I have been Zool. Have an excellent day.